There are three things that I see people get wrong in yoga classes all the time, and I'm going to refer to these as yoga mistakes. Now, the thing is that if we continue to practice in this way, we might limit our progress, or we might feel that we're not strong enough or flexible enough to do certain poses. When in fact, we might just need to make little tweaks to our practice to help us get into these poses and also to help us progress. So let's look at our first pose, downward facing dog. So mistake number one in downward facing dog is not knowing how far away to have our hands on our feet. So I see lots of beginners in particular having their hands and their feet quite far away from each other, or them being really close and being in these little awkward shapes. I might be exaggerating, but just to give you an idea. So in order to find the correct distance, what we want to do is come into tabletop position. So we want shoulders over the wrists, hips over the knees, and from here what we're going to do is we're going to curl the toes, and this is our downward facing dog. Mistake number two, especially if we have limited flexibility in our calves and in our hamstrings, what we tend to do is we tend to think that in downward facing dog we need to have our legs straight. But if I have limited flexibility and I have my legs straight, I'm going to have to bring my weight forward, and this can be quite tiring for my hands and for my arms. So instead what I can do is I can bend the knees and send my hips back. And so ideally what we want to do is we want to have a straight line from our hips to the top of our head. So we can keep our knees bent. With time, we might be able to bring the heels to the floor, but it's better to have our knees bent rather than be in this kind of position. And our third mistake in downward facing dog is bringing the shoulders a bit too close to the ears. So lots of beginners in particular, I see this tendency of bringing the shoulders all the way up towards the ears, and also this can be quite tiring. So instead of this, think that you want to bring your shoulders down and broaden those shoulder blades. So try to keep your shoulders away from your ears. So think of it like this. Instead of having our shoulders all the way crunched up towards the ears, what we want to do is we want to bring our shoulders away from the ears and broaden those shoulder blades. So let's look at our second pose, Chaturanga. The main mistake I see is mainly when we don't have a lot of strength in our arms is coming into plank, whether it's full plank or knees down. What I normally see is this tendency to create a wave and just kind of flop down onto the floor. Now, not that there's anything particularly wrong with this, it's just that it's not going to help us build the strength in our arms to be able to actually do this pose in its, let's say, best manner. So if you feel that that's your type of chaturanga, of lowering down, here's some tips for you. So when we come into our plank, I want you to think that you've got your shoulders over your wrists, and then from here, bring the knees down. I want you to keep your elbows in, so we try to avoid bringing the elbows out. We want to bring the elbows in when we lower down. So I've got my knees down, I bring my elbows in, and what I want to think is I want to go forward and down. So I go forward and down. And then if I want to work on strength, I can inhale and push up. And if I'm working in Chaturanga with my knees up, what I like to do is I like to use blocks. So here's a little trick. You can use blocks if you're wondering, well, how far down do I go in my Chaturanga or my lower plank? So we use the blocks, and they are guides for our shoulders. So we want our shoulders to go just up until where the blocks are. So I find my plank, shoulders over the wrists. I can either lower down from here, or I can bring my knees down, and I come down just until I find my blocks. And then from there, either I push up or I can come into upward facing dog. So if I were in my full plank, the same, shoulders over the wrists, I lower down until I find my blocks. And now let's look at our third pose, upward facing dog. The main mistake I see with upward facing dog is basically this. So I've lowered down, however it is that I lower down, and then I have my hands quite forward and I push up. So what we've got here is we've got a combination of upward facing dog and cobra. So my hips are on the floor, my hands are quite far forward, and I've pushed up. The problem is that this puts a lot of strain in the lower back. So this is something to best try to avoid. Our two alternatives are either work on cobra or work towards a correct upward facing dog. So let's see, I'm in plank, I lower my knees down, I bring my weight forward, I lower down, and then from here, my hands are next to my chest, I open up, my hips are on the floor, I've bent my elbows, my shoulders are not near my ears, my shoulders are away from my ears, and I look forward, and this is a lovely cobra pose. And then from here, I would go into a downward facing dog. And so if I want to work on a correct upward facing dog, what I would do is I find the plank, I can bring my knees down, I lower down, and then from here I push forward, I come up, my hips are off the floor, my toes are point, shoulders come back, I look forward or slightly up. And then from here, I would go over the toes into a downward facing dog. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more tips and tutorials. And if you want to see more tutorials like this, then check out my playlist here. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.